When you look at BMW M car values and you realize that in the past they have gone down and then gone quite a bit up, think the original BMW E30 M3, one can look at an F80 generation BMW M3, the previous generation to what we have currently, the G80, and see that this is up for sale for in the $30,000 range and think, why buy a brand new G80 M3 when I can get something like this for much cheaper? But the question is, should you? Well, I am not one to stand in front of the camera and talk about smart financial decisions because I own 3 vehicles. None of them were smart financial decisions. So you really shouldn't listen to me and my opinion on this sort of thing. But I thought I would bring you all a review of a 10-year-old M3 and see what the M3 used to be like. This M3 was quite controversial because the M3 that came before it, the E90 generation M3, had a roaring, screaming V8 engine, which would explode if you looked at it funny, but that doesn't matter because all M cars explode when you're not ready for it. So that left this one with huge shoes to fill, and the general consensus among most people is that this is the weakest M3 out of all of them. It handles the worst and it strays the furthest from the M3 ethos, but I'm gonna say it in front of the camera on record, and I am prepared to bear the hate. This M3 is better than the current M3 in my opinion, in pretty much every single subjective and measurable way. The styling's better, the driving experience is better, the engine is better, the ride quality is better. Pretty much everything about it, in my opinion, is better than the new M3, including the price. You can find one of these, like I said, all day in the $30,000 range. And to me, I think it's quite a tempting idea. If it were up to me, this is the car that I would put in my garage. So let's take a review type tour of it. So throughout this video, I'm going to point out the various areas in which I believe this M3 is better than the current one. If you want to see a video on a current M3, I have a review of an M3 xDrive competition that'll be linked on the screen somewhere right now. And I have to say, that new M3, it's not a bad car. It's quite fantastic and it's hilariously fun to drive. But I think this one's better. And the first thing that I'm going to point out is that I think the styling of this older M3 is better than the new one. Now that's the typical BMW purist idea where the last M car was the best looking M car and now the new one is awful and they ruined it. I like the look of the G80 M3, but I prefer the understated look of the F80 M3. I love the way they took the regular F33 series and basically sent it to the gym and it came back and looked buff and bulky and sporty. Take these widened fender flares, which I think are better executed than on the current G80 M3, and the front end with that M bumper and M performance fascia with the correct shape kidney grills also looks pretty good. And just the fact that the F33 series is a pretty good looking car to boot. And the way that they took it and made it into an M3, there's something about the way this M3 looks that I absolutely love. Again, I'm not saying that the new G80 M3 is a bad looking car, and I'm not saying the G20 is a bad looking car. I just prefer the look of the F80. I prefer the understatedness, and I just love what they did to it to turn it into an M3. But styling is subjective. That's my opinion. You can have your opinion as well where you're watching this video, likely on the toilet. But I wanted to just point out that I like the look of this older M3 more. And before I continue, I have also done a review of an F30 Generation 3 Series, an F31 328D wagon, which will also be linked on the screen right now. So the review type tour of this car isn't gonna be super in-depth at all, actually. I'm basically just planning on pointing out the parts that are M-ified from the regular 3 Series and then taking it out for a drive. So if you want a more in-depth review of an interesting diesel 3 Series wagon, I'd recommend watching that video. It's one of my favorite videos I've done recently. So with that being said, let's hop inside. Getting in the back of the F80 M3, there isn't that much to talk about back here that hasn't already been discussed in my 328D video, but I'm going to point out that this M bucket seat doesn't make my experience as a tall passenger in the rear 6'3". This seat's in my driving position. This bulky, sporty seat doesn't make me any more comfortable than in the F31. In fact, maybe a little bit less comfortable, but you could get carbon bucket seats in various versions of this car. I'm glad sitting where I am, this car doesn't have that, and it has much more comfortable, cheap feeling plastic instead. But there's not that much room back here. And in terms of changes over the regular F33 series, there's not that much. I think these headrests are embossed into the seats, not separated like they are in the F30 series. Not that important. They're basically just designed to look like the sporty seats up front, which is good because that brings a little bit of continuity through the whole cabin. This red leather everywhere you look is quite M-like and quite sporty looking. You have some more red on the door panel right here and red stitching, which is nice. And like I said, there's not that much comfort and there's not that much changed at all, actually, from the F33 series. So let's hop up front where it really matters. The front seat of the F80 generation BMW M3, and you're met with what you'd expect for an M3 based on an F33 series. It's pretty much exactly the same, but the seats are a bit sporty and there's some carbon fiber in here. But if we go into a little bit more detail, you can see that these seats up front are quite obviously different from regular F33 series. These are the standard M3 seats, and they're finished in that exact same red that you see in the back. And they have the M logos embossed just below the headrest area. And they've got a lot more support, a lot more bolstering in the seats, obviously, as what you'd expect. But if you wanted to, you could get ridiculous carbon bucket seats if you really wanted to get involved on the racetrack. These seats are a bit more useful for every day, which is nice because we're not driving this car on a racetrack today. We're driving out on public roads, so this will be nicer to have. This door panel is the exact same design as the door panel behind. Red stitching, and it has this red and black two-tone theme here, which is pretty nice looking. Got a Harman Kardon speaker tweeter thing up there, and you have the basic F33 series dashboard, but instead of wood or aluminum or some type of plastic trim, you have carbon fiber trim. Below that, you have some cup holders, as you'd expect, and behind that you have an M gear selector. This car was available as the current G80 M3 is available with a 6-speed manual transmission, but unfortunately, we have the other transmission option, which in this earlier M3 is a true M-style 7-speed dual clutch transmission, which means two things. The shifts are lightning fast, and two, there's no creep function. You put it into drive or reverse and you have to blip the throttle to get it to go, which can make it quite irritating to live with every day, but I imagine you could get used to that. Also, if you're parked on a hill, it has a hill hold feature to hold the brake for you for a second, just like the manual car has. This transmission is more suited to track use than a regular automatic is, but the new M3's automatic transmission not only has a creep function, not only is a traditional automatic transmission, it's also pretty ridiculously fast, and I don't think anybody has complained about losing the DCT for the current M3, but for a couple generations, you had the option of a dual clutch transmission in the M3, as all M cars had about 10 years ago. On the side there, to the left, you have a couple controls for your camera, your parking sensors, and then you have a few drive controls, traction control off, and then you've got some configurable things like your steering and your suspension, and your engine power. Now that is shoved into another submenu under the setup button, but you have just more basic controls here. If you want to control your suspension, there's a dedicated button for it. And if you want to control the speed of your transmission shifting, you have a dedicated switch for that right here behind the transmission. And behind that, you have a traditional manual parking brake, which is nice to see. And in an enthusiast M car, a traditional parking brake is a bit nicer to see than a regular electronic parking brake. But again, not sure that's a big problem for most people that are looking to buy an M3, but it's worth noting. But if these dedicated buttons are a bit too annoying for you and you just want to set up your own dedicated M mode like you can in the current M cars, well, you can do that too. Over in the steering wheel on the left-hand side, you have M1 and M2 just like in the current M3, which are your configurable drive modes. So you can have M1 for when you're on the racetrack or the mountain road, and you can have M2 for just regular everyday commuting, which is nice. It's not as well integrated as the new M3 is with those red buttons, but it's nice that it's there. Also on the steering wheel, you have some shift paddles, again, to operate the dual clutch transmission, but you can shift it with this shifter here, which if you look around it, you notice there's no park button. And I had to Google how to put this car into park because I'm an idiot. Basically what you do is you turn it off when the gear selector is in drive, and then that will put it into park automatically. But yes, if you want to park it and leave it on, you have to pull the parking brake and put it into neutral, as far as I know. Just like a manual transmission car, which can be quite annoying. Over in the left, you have traditional analog gauges, which I like to see, and they're MFI'd. They've got this gray background and they look a little bit more focused than in the regular 328 diesel that I reviewed a couple months ago. And you have some basic information below that. There's no digital gauge cluster, there's no on-screen map, there's nothing of that nature. You have basic information in that screen below and focused analog gauges, which as an enthusiast, I prefer to see those. And then back to the steering wheel, you have a 3-spoke M steering wheel with some M colored stitching around the rim and an M logo down in the bottom. And that's it. When it comes to M stuff in this interior, that's basically all you get over the regular F33 series. If you sat in this seat and you looked just straight ahead like this, you'd think that somebody put carbon fiber trim in their mom's 328i, but no. This is the full-on M3, and there were other versions of the M3, which we're going to talk about. Let's look underneath the hood real quick. Welcome underneath the hood, where you can see the first BMW M3 powertrain that featured twin turbos. Like I said, the M3 before this one, the E90 generation, had a 4-liter naturally aspirated V8, but owing to environmental issues, and the need for greater power, they threw a couple turbos on a 6-cylinder, and into the M3's engine bay it went with 425 horsepower and 406 pound-feet of torque, sent to the rear wheels only, no all-wheel drive option, through a 6-speed manual, or what we have here, the 7-speed dual clutch transmission. That's more power and more torque than the outgoing M3 before this, and no doubt it was more fuel efficient, which nobody cares about with an M3. There were also more powerful versions of this engine, dubbed the S55, in the M3 competition, which had somewhere around 440 horsepower, and the M3 CS, which had 450 horsepower. The M3 CS of this generation was really the ultimate M3, but you could go one step further with the M4 GTS, which was a super lightweight, track-focused version of the M4. And when it comes to reliability, well, it's better than the E90 M3. I haven't heard that much complaints about it from a couple people that I've talked to that own these cars, but just know you're not going into an M3 or any M-powered BMW for reliability, are you? So you can't expect it to be a Toyota Corolla, because it certainly isn't a Corolla in the way it drives, and it's probably not a Corolla in the way it'll break your heart and leave you on the side of the road. So let's risk it all, take this car out for a drive. Earlier in the video, I said that I was going to point out every part of this F80 M3 that I prefer to the new M3, and then you might have thought that I forgot about that. Well, that's because most of the things that this new M3 is better at, again, in my opinion, compared to the new M3, is just the way it drives. I just like how this older M3 drives. I did a video on the newer M3, and it's great and it's cool and it is an absolute hoot to drive, but it's a little bit annoying. I'm not a fan of that S58. I'm not a fan of the power delivery that it has. It's a bit laggy and it's a bit just annoying to live with. It's like putting up with your 7-year-old cousin who has severe ADHD and is in a sugar rush. Sometimes you're in the mood for it, but you're not always in the mood for it. And it's like BMW decided to make the M3 more pure feeling as an M car by just making it annoying. The ride is diabolical in the M3 and the M4 in particular. The engine, well, yes, it's great when you rev it out, and just regular driving, it's noisy, it's laggy, it's just frustrating to deal with. It's got so much power that you can't really have that much fun with it without being a little bit too reckless on public roads. And if you opt for the manual transmission, the clutch in that manual is just so difficult to use. It's so frustrating. This F80 M3, I think, solves all of these problems, and it's a lot cheaper. The ride quality already is better. Yeah, I don't care if it's worse on track. I could not care less about how this car performs on track, to be honest, because you're not using an M3 on track. At least most people don't. You're using it every day. You're using it as your everyday car. That's the M3's whole ethos. On the track, I'm sure the G80 M3 has this thing licked. But around town driving, except for the annoying dual clutch transmission that I had to blip to get to go there, this is better. But when you open it up, it still sets your trousers on fire. Wow. 420 horsepower, they claim. I don't believe that. This has got to be where BMW started underrating their cars, because I don't know if 420 horsepower is what this thing is pushing. It feels like a little bit more than that, and it struggles for traction when you open it up. And the sound that that S55 makes, I don't care what kind of argument the G80 owners in the comments are gonna have, this sounds 1,000 times better than the G80 M3. Just not even a question. The engine in this car sounds like a proper, high-performance, energetic M engine, and it doesn't feel like there's any fake engine sound being pumped into the speakers. There may very well be, but it's not as noticeable. This engine is smoother than in the new M3. It's less laggy, but it still has a really satisfying surge to it when you get on boost. And the sound, just the sound, is amazing. The new M3's sound sounds so fake, in my opinion. It's a good sound when you open it up, and you're gonna be laughing in a G80 M3. If you have a G80 M3, you're gonna be happy with it. But the F80 M3 is the one that I would easily choose over the G80 M3, and that's not just where value is concerned. In all parts of the driving experience, in my opinion, the F80 M3 has the G80 M3 completely licked, and in styling as well. And yeah, the interior quality, you could make a point that the interior isn't as nice as the G80 M3. And yeah, maybe it doesn't handle quite as well, but it still handles pretty damn nicely. I don't think the G80 M3 is so much better than the F80 M3 that it's worth all the extra money. I really don't think it is. And if you're watching this video and you're thinking that you kind of want to buy a $35,000 odd M3, first, know what you're getting into, because it's an M car. It's not going to be the most reliable thing in the world. But for 35 grand, when it comes down to the way it feels and the way it drives when it's working, it's kind of hard to argue, especially since you can get an i8 for around the same money as this. And yeah, the i8 looks better, but the i8 isn't as good to drive as the M3. It's not even a question. Oh man, the sound. That's all I have to say. Sound. That ear right there is releasing massive levels of dopamine up here, and that results in a big ol' smile on my face because, ooh, it's just so good. I'm sure I'm not doing a good job of putting my finger on exactly what it is that makes this older M3 better than the new M3, but I hope that I'm making a decent enough case for it. It feels better, it sounds better, and it's just as fast in my opinion. I don't want a car to be really any faster than this. This car is right in that area where I believe fun cars should be in terms of horsepower. I'd say around 250 to 500. You don't want much more than that. Oh man. This engine has a sound and a feel that I liken to an E46 M3, and nobody says that's a bad M3. Nobody at all. Everyone says this is a bad M3. It's not. It's just so not. You have to drive it. The ride quality is great. The sound is excellent. The power is all there, and it feels hairy. It feels like it wants to put you in a ditch the way that it fishtails when you put your foot down. It's a proper M3 in every definition of the word, except, like I said, for $35,000, the experience that you get, it's a complete bargain. And when you compare it to the new M3, it's better, in my opinion. It's just better. So I hope you all enjoyed this video, and if you watch this video and you decide that you want to buy an F80 M3, and you go and you buy an F80 M3 and it explodes, don't hold me liable. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for watching. Like, subscribe, do all the normal YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.